It's official. He lied, lied, and lied again. Boris Johnson made history today in all the worst ways as his dramatic political career came to a squalid end.
Boris Johnson's legacy will be to have undertaken and achieved the greatest political disaster of the last half-century.
For his supporters, the report of the Parliamentary Privileges Committee, on which the Tories are in a majority, was nothing less than a stitch-up.
I think it's spiteful, vindictive and overreaching, quite frankly.
One should never say never in politics, so anything is possible, but it does look like the end of the road for Mr Johnson's political career. And although there have been some rum characters as Prime Minister over the years, never one who was effectively thrown out of the House of Commons for lying to it. Also on News at 10 tonight. At least 78 dead, but were there many more children crammed into the hold of the migrant ship that sank in Greece? Inflation has been soaring here, but why is it falling already in Spain? Joel has a special report. Mounting losses and limited gains, Emma has a report from the Ukrainian front line, and as Lily Allen returns to the theatre, she reveals to Nina why she's back on stage.
Would you cast her in something again?
Yeah, definitely, if I can afford it.
You can't.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. In the long span of British history, the office of Prime Minister is a relatively modern innovation. And whilst the 300 years or so of its existence have given us a few genuine titans, we've also had our share of the weak, the venal and the plain useless. But in all that time, no one has ever been thrown out of office and then out of the House of Commons itself for lying. So Boris Johnson, who walked before he was pushed, has written himself into the history books in ways that he will absolutely hate, as his diatribe against the committee that damned him today indicated. It brings the curtain down, probably, on the truly remarkable political career of a man who rose on a tide of populist jocularity, won a referendum that might have changed the country forever, triumphed spectacularly in the election that followed, but has now come to a squalid end for not being able to tell the simple truth. A morality tale, one might say, if ever there was one.
It is an extraordinary fall from grace. Boris Johnson had the biggest election win in decades, achieved his ambition of Britain leaving the EU, was Prime Minister in the country's moment of crisis. But today...
Is this the end, Mr Johnson?
He was effectively run out of Parliament. The Privileges Committee said it would have suspended Boris Johnson for 90 days, which can trigger a by-election, if he hadn't resigned first. Their explosive findings landed at 9 a.m.
The Privileges Committee is there to defend this House, and as many members have pointed out, it had a Conservative majority on it.
Today, that committee concluded that when Boris Johnson said that guidance was followed completely in number 10, he misled Parliament. When he failed to tell MPs about his own knowledge of the gatherings, he misled Parliament. When he claimed to rely on repeated assurances that the rules had not been broken, he misled Parliament. And they accused him of being complicit in a campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee.
The evidence I shall give for this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth.
Boris Johnson said he had engaged with the Privileges Committee despite being warned that it was a kangaroo court. He claimed members, and especially the chair, Labour's Harriet Harman, had already expressed prejudicial views. In an angry statement, almost 1,700 words long, he slammed the conclusions as rubbish, deranged, ludicrous, preposterous and an assassination. One anti-Brexit Tory grandee suggested Boris Johnson would not be remembered quite like his idol.
I can think of no characteristics that link Churchill with Boris Johnson. I think that Boris Johnson's legacy will be to have undertaken and achieved the greatest political disaster of the last half-century.
So glad to see the back of him?
Well, have we seen the back of him? That is the daunting question.
Maybe not, according to Jacob Rees-Mogg, now Sir Jacob, thanks to Boris Johnson. Is this it for Boris Johnson's political career?
No, because the great thing about our system, ultimately the people in charge are the voters, and I have a feeling that if Boris Johnson stands in the constituency at the next election, voters will be very keen to send him back to Parliament.
The committee met over 40 times to discuss evidence, including photographs like these, that they said clearly contradicted what Mr Johnson had told MPs. In one submission to the committee, a Number 10 official claimed that Downing Street was like an island oasis of normality during COVID, that wine time Fridays continued, that social distancing and mask wearing wasn't enforced, and that staff were emailed to be warned to be careful of cameras outside the door. The Prime Minister was, conveniently perhaps, only out and about before publication on an immigration police raid, with no comment on Boris Johnson's rule-breaking. But Labour wasn't holding back.
Boris Johnson is not only a lawbreaker but a liar. He's not fit for public office and he's disgraced himself and continues to act like a, pound-shot Trump.
The Prime Minister now wants to move on, hosting drinks for his cabinet tonight as he hopes to steady the ship. There will be a one-line whip when his MPs vote on Boris Johnson on Monday, allowing them to abstain if it avoids angering their members. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
Now, two key events underpin the Privileges Committee report and Boris Johnson's fall. The infamous film of the practice press conference by Downing Street aides, which seemed to treat COVID, or at least COVID rules, as a joke, and the exposure by Paul on this programme of those Downing Street parties. So who better than Paul to deconstruct the report and give us a detailed analysis of what's in it and why. Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. And of course, this is the third investigation to find Boris Johnson partied during lockdown, but the first to conclude that he also lied, and repeatedly. Here's when. On the 1st of December 2021, the Daily Mirror had just published rumours of parties in Number 10. Boris Johnson told MPs at Prime Minister's questions that day all guidance was followed. The committee concluded that was a lie. A week later, ITV News had just broadcast this video of Downing Street staff joking about a Christmas party, which blew the scandal wide open. This time at PMQs, he stated, "I have been repeatedly assured that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken." The committee concluded that was a second lie. Then, in January, following revelations broadcast on ITV News about a garden party in Number 10, Boris Johnson told MPs it could be said technically to fall within the guidance. Once more, the committee concluded that he'd lied. There were other incidences too, but why was it deliberately misleading and not accidental? Well, the committee points to Boris Johnson's direct personal experience of non-compliance. In other words, he went to the parties, he must have known they didn't comply. And they rejected his argument that senior staff had assured him no rules had been broken. The only assurances that we can be certain were given to Mr Johnson were from two media advisers, they conclude. Boris Johnson claims the committee is, in his words, a kangaroo court. But does that hold any truth? Well, firstly, most of its members are Conservative MPs, hardly a political witch hunt. As for Boris Johnson's talk of a Remainer plot, well, in fact, every one of our many sources who blew the whistle over Partygate voted both for Brexit and for Boris Johnson.
I mean, personally, I still am pro-Brexit. People haven't been conspiring in groups within Number 10, within the government to actively, plot and conspire against the then Prime Minister. To say it was organised, it was set up, is total rubbish.
The former Prime Minister will continue to contest that, but we now have a police investigation, Cabinet Office investigation and Privileges Committee report, all tainting, Tom, his relationship with the truth.
Paul, you watched all this play out. In a nutshell, how would you characterise the reasons for his downfall?
I think, Tom, it is what many would now see as a toxic relationship with the truth that Boris Johnson has, and that has caused him two main problems. Obviously, the problem that he misled Parliament, he lied to Parliament, he has been caught out on that. But secondly, I think it means that he doesn't quite appreciate why others place value in the truth. And when it came to Partygate, that meant he just couldn't quite get inside the heads of those who felt betrayed, who felt that Number 10 had showed great dishonesty in not obeying the rules that they had implemented. For example, this week I spoke to Jackie Green, who we've spoken to many times before on News at 10. Some viewers might remember her. Her mum died on the night that they held a Christmas party in Number 10. She has now left the country. She's moved to Spain because she's so sickened by this scandal. Now, there might not be that many people who feel quite as strongly as Jackie about it, but many, many do feel very betrayed by what Boris Johnson did. And I don't think he's ever fully understood that.
OK, Paul, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's put all that to Robert in Downing Street. Robert, I guess the question tonight is simple, perhaps more than anything else. Have we seen the last of Boris Johnson?
Gosh, that is an important question. I think we should just take a moment to recognise what a historic figure he was. Might not have left the European Union without his leadership of that campaign. There's an entire, probably the most expensive public inquiry in history that's been set up to assess whether his leadership of the country during COVID was good or bad. And tonight, we've had a Prime Minister being accused of holding Parliament in contempt multiple occasions, lying to MPs on multiple occasions. Now, I've been steeped, as you have, in the political life of this country for decades. Did I, until recently, think we would ever have a Prime Minister being found guilty of those offences? No, I didn't. He is unique in British history. Now, talking to his MP colleagues on the Tory benches tonight, there are a smallish number who agree with him that it's a kangaroo court. And again, we should just recognise his reaction to being found guilty is so astonishing. To accuse this incredibly important part of that institution behind me, the House of Commons, of behaving like a kangaroo court, of being complicit in a political assassination, of undermining democracy. Again, this is so not within the British tradition. But the truth is, the majority of Tory MPs are just fed up with the Boris Johnson drama. I don't think there's any chance of his returning to Parliament anytime soon, partly because Rishi Sunak will not put him on the candidates list. That said, do I think that you and I will be talking about him again on this programme? You can bet it. You can bet on it, because the one thing we know about Boris Johnson is he loves controversy, he loves making trouble. He'll be back in some shape or form, I don't think as Prime Minister, but he will certainly be a big figure.
OK, Robert, thank you very much. And Paul and his producer Nathan have made a very excellent episode of their podcast, Partygate. So do check that out wherever you get your podcasts. Really worth listening to. Now, to other news now, and first the latest on the appalling disaster which overwhelmed a fishing boat loaded with migrants off the coast of Greece. Despite a huge search operation, no more survivors have been found. No more bodies either, even though it's thought hundreds of people, including perhaps 100 children, could have been crammed below deck in the hold. The overloaded fishing boat set out from Tobruk on the north coast of Libya. It sank suddenly 50 miles southwest of Pylos yesterday evening. Tonight, questions are being asked about the actions of the Greek authorities which had been shadowing the vessel.
All day, helicopters and boats have been returning to the port of Kalamata, but they're returning empty, their lifebelts unused. 104 survivors were picked up in the first frantic hours, but overnight it was only bodies that were returned to shore. Those who were rescued have told us there were between 600 and 750 people on board, including women and children, and they'd been sailing for days.
They didn't have any food in the ship, so they're like 5 days without any food or water. They had sunburns all over their faces and hands.
Relatives have started arriving here too, unable to wait helplessly at home. I've spoken to one man from Wolverhampton who knows that 3 of his cousins from Pakistan boarded the boat. So far, he's found only 1. Qasem Abu Zaid, who lives in Germany, last spoke to his Syrian wife 8 days ago when she boarded the stricken trawler. She has not yet been found. It's unclear why the boat capsized, although from these pictures taken by the Coast Guard it was dangerously overcrowded. The Greek authorities have been criticised for not intervening earlier. The former Greek Prime Minister and leader of the opposition visited survivors this afternoon and called for a change in policy towards migrants. And are you concerned that the hardening of policies towards migrants contributed to this tragedy?
As I said before, I think that it is necessary to change rapidly the European strategy for migration. I think that this has to be priority if we want to keep our human identity.
In Kalamata tonight, locals echoed that call. 9 of the survivors, including the boat's captain, have now been arrested on suspicion of people trafficking. With over 400 people feared still missing, it's likely to be one of the worst disasters ever seen off these shores. Romilly Weeks, News at 10, Kalamata.
For the second day in succession, a sombre and emotional vigil has been held in Nottingham to remember the 2 young students and a school caretaker murdered in this week's gun and knife rampage. Thousands of people gathered in the city's market square to pay their respects to 19-year-old students Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber and school caretaker Ian Coates. Many in the crowd were weeping as the families delivered heartfelt tribute. The mother of Grace O'Malley Kumar, a talented hockey player and a medical student, pleaded with onlookers not to have hate in their hearts as she remembered her beloved daughter.
She was a treasured and adored child. She wanted very few things in life. She wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to play hockey with her pals. She wanted to have fun.
Barnaby Webber was a history student and a keen cricketer. His mother spoke of the support the families feel from the crowd at the vigil.
So today, we stand here and we feel your love and we're united in grief and shock and disbelief. And one day we will smile again, but it will take time.
Moving tributes too came from the sons of Ian Coates, wearing red football shirts in honour of their 65-year-old dad, a keen Nottingham Forest supporter. They spoke of how his work as a school caretaker had affected many people.
It feels like he's touched a lot of hearts over the years, more than what we assumed and knew that he had. So it's been really nice and heartwarming to see the messages and the people come out and talk about how he was when they were younger and how he's helped them. Some beautiful comments.
As the crowds were gathering for the vigil in the city centre, police were continuing to hold a 31-year-old man suspected of carrying out the deadly attacks. Detectives were tonight given a further 36 hours to question him. OK, still to come on News at 10. Glenda Jackson, the double Oscar winner who swapped acting for politics, dies sadly, aged 87. And the volunteers training to join Kyiv's fighters on the front line. Those stories and more after this short break. Welcome back. Glenda Jackson burst onto the cinema screens at the end of the 1960s with an almost elemental force. A new kind of actress, independent and strong, not beholden to old-fashioned ideas of glamour. But at the height of her fame and with 2 Oscars under her belt, she left the movies to forge a new career as a formidable Labour MP. Her death today, at the age of 87, closes a remarkable chapter in British cultural and political history.
You must not speak to me like that. It is not fit.
She was acting royalty, an undisputed giant of stage and screen.
I have never said I would marry him.
Whose portrayal of Elizabeth I reflected something of her own grit.
Your Majesty! Enough!
Never Hollywood's idea of a leading lady, yet twice an Oscar winner. Her performances were often groundbreaking.
Aren't they charming, Ursula?
And rarely less than mesmerising.
Like it? It's remarkable.
Oh, God!
Acting, she believed, was a serious job for serious-minded people.
You must be hungry for something.
But that didn't stop her making fun of the profession or making herself the comic star of a Morecambe and Wise masterpiece.
All men are fools, and what makes them so is having beauty like what I have got.
The young Jackson's first job was in a branch of boots, but she said acting, indeed anything, was better than a chemist shop.
Winner Glenda Jackson receives yet again another award.
And her rise through the ranks was rapid and always on her own terms. Yet she swapped it all for the political stage, still able to hold an audience with typically sharp lines.
Greed, selfishness, no care for the weaker. Sharp elbows, sharp knees.
This was her verdict on Margaret Thatcher.
But a woman, not on my terms. And yes, this is a party political broadcast.
But as career politician, this prickly character was perhaps always miscast.
Spit fire! Spout rain!
In her 80s, she returned to the stage, a commanding King Lear.
In King Lear, it's an old person filled with rage for younger people, and I definitely felt her rage was one of the major fuels that kept her going and kept her very vital.
Was I here yesterday?
Yet another award came for playing a woman with dementia. But age never withered Glenda Jackson. She just finished a new film with Michael Caine. The lights in West End theatres will be dimmed tomorrow in her memory.
The Oscar-winning actress and former MP Glenda Jackson, who died today. OK, we had a sombre prediction this week about interest rates staying high for the foreseeable future. But Britain is not alone in having to adapt to this. Today, the European Central Bank raised the cost of borrowing to 3.5% across the 20 countries in the Eurozone. And it warned there's more to come because inflation looks set to remain too high for too long. Nevertheless, higher interest rates seem to suit some Eurozone countries more than others. Countries like Spain, for instance, where the rate of inflation has already fallen to under 3%, well below half the rate seen elsewhere in Europe.
In Madrid's Plaza Mayor, the tourists are back in force. Spain's economy has ridden out the impact of the pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine better than most. Food inflation has peaked, energy bills are finally falling, but no one here is feeling better off yet. Josefina Canel tells us the price of everything has gone up. Eggs, bread, oil, most of all, olive oil. It's stabilising now, but we'll see. Inflation is easing, but money is also becoming more expensive to borrow. The European Central Bank raised interest rates again today and made it clear it plans to keep going. One of Spain's vulnerabilities, not for the first time, is its housing market. The last crash 15 years ago sent the economy into a tailspin. Higher interest rates have slowed sales, but prices are flatlining rather than falling. Now is not a great time to be a housing developer. In Britain, the vast majority of homeowners have fixed rate mortgages, but in Spain, the vast majority have variable deals. As a result, when interest rates rise, the full impact is felt immediately.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Joel. Pleased
nice to meet you. Come in, please.
Maria Vindel took out her mortgage 18 years ago. Her monthly repayments have risen by €180 already and are set to rise again by a similar amount in November. Inevitably, she's concerned.
I'm not going to the gym. I am not going out every weekend, as I used to do. When I'm asked to go to the theater or whatever, I think about that. I also check the offers in the supermarket.
Higher interest rates are bad news for Spain's coalition government. The Prime Minister has called a snap general election for July, which the polls suggest he will lose. This government minister believes inflation has been tamed in Spain and the European Central Bank's actions are simply causing greater hardship.
The increase in interest rates is, at this moment, killing flies with cannonballs. They are not necessary to tackle inflation. We have been able to tackle inflation in Spain rapidly during the last year. And at the same time, rising interest rates might kill GDP growth and might kill employment creation.
Spain is currently living through a drought. Unless there's rain soon, food prices could creep up again for all of us. The economy here faces significant challenges, but then it has done ever since COVID, and thus far it has stayed the course. Joel Hills, News at 10 in Madrid.
There was no let-up today in the fierce fighting along the 600-mile front line of the war in Ukraine. And as the Ukrainian counter-offensive continues against Russian occupiers, so the inevitable losses mount. NATO reported today that gains are being made, but any progress is gradual. And as training goes on for new recruits for frontline service, soldiers mourn colleagues they have lost.
In death, he's called so many things. Hero, patriot, defender of Ukraine. In life, he was called Ivan Ivasev, a 27-year-old volunteer fighter. A son, a brother, husband and comrade, whose war ended just before the counter-offensive began. For those who are part of that offensive, a brief if heartbreaking respite from the front line. But no respite from the knowledge of what's at stake. Their hands just for a short time, holding roses, not rifles. They will return to battle with the prayers of a nation, but prayers are not delivering peace. And so the ranks are being reinforced. The newest recruits leaving quieter lives to learn how to be soldiers. In a month, the trenches will be on the front line. The fire will be incoming, not just outgoing. There must be fear. There is certainly fight. Vadim is a computer expert, swapping cyber war for conventional war.
I've got 7 of my friends, and 5 of them died in this war. And right now I just feel responsibility for their souls, and I need some revenge. That's why I'm here.
This battalion used to be trained in how to defend Ukrainian trenches. Now they're being trained in how to attack and overrun Russian ones. No one doubts the challenges they face.
Ukraine has lost close to 20,000 soldiers, some of its most experienced. Julia repatriates the fallen to their families.
It is a tough job, but you know what? Our mission is to bring all soldiers back home to their relatives, because everybody deserves to have a place for peace.
The counter-offensive will be one of the most dangerous phases of this war. Many other families will make this desperate walk, bearing the bodies of sons and daughters who will never know who won the war they gave their lives for. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Ukraine.
The long and difficult war in Ukraine. Well, let's change the mood drastically as we come to the end of the programme and say finally it's 14 years since the pop star turned actress Lily Allen won a legal case to protect her from harassment by paparazzi photographers. Now, with the media in the legal spotlight once again, she's to star in the West End revival of The Pillow Man, an award-winning play about freedom of speech. Nina went to meet her, and the play's author, Martin McDonagh, the Oscar-winning writer and director of films like The Banshees of Inisherin.
From when Martin met Lily.
We ran into each other at Glastonbury. You weren't expecting.
Oh, yeah, that was cool.
To this.
The Pillow Man, a dark, dark comedy set in a police state. Its themes torture and the repression of freedom of speech.
The first duty of a storyteller is to tell a story.
And its writer, Martin McDonagh, has cast a relative theatre newcomer, Lily Allen, in the lead.
I just thought you were a perfect person for it. You know, your integrity as a writer, which is kind of what the character has, and danger.
I mean, it's not bad going, is it, that you kind of, the second play and you're in the West End?
I like taking big things on, and I like taking risks, and I kind of like that adrenaline rush and that fear of the unknown. You know, that's always been quite central to everything that I've ever done creatively. So, yeah, it feels like a lot, and it feels intense, but it also feels like normal for me.
When you first left me, I didn't know what to say.
For more than a decade, Lily Allen's normal was life as a pop star, her every triumph and trauma the stuff of tabloid headlines. After some time away, she came back with acting roles here in the TV drama Dreamland. Now she's in a play likely to be the hottest ticket in town, bringing the inevitable spotlight.
I guess, you know, when you're doing something like this, you're opening yourself up to, you know, a constant sort of stream of commentary. Some of it's good and some of it's bad, and, you know, some of it hurts. You try not to let it hurt as much as you can, but...
Do you try to avoid it, or what?
Yeah, I do.
Now, if I've done something to you, just tell me what I've done to you.
But you didn't do anything to me. I just don't like you no more.
McDonagh, the man behind last year's The Banshees of Inisherin, won an Olivier Award when his play was first staged 20 years ago.
Are you enjoying it yet?
There's a lot of dialogue in this play, and it's quite a lot of pressure. I don't have the best memory, so I'm sometimes freaking out that I'm not going to get it right, and there have been a couple of slip-ups.
No. You've got a great memory.
Would you cast her in something again?
Yeah, definitely, if I can afford it.
You can't.
Nina Nanar, News at 10.
That's it. Good night. Thanks for watching.